Hey, leaders. I'm back and I got a guest with me. You all know how excitable I can be when we have a guest joining us, and that is what is happening today. My guest, her name, our guest is Natasha Ar I forgot already. Arnia
Aruliah.
Aruliah. Our guest, her name is Natasha Aruliah. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, hey, Terri. Hi, everyone.
I met Natasha, y'all, back, gosh, I met her through another coach, and I was going to her for a inclusive education workshop session I was creating for some leaders, and she was going to support us on that journey towards more understanding around inclusion. But that all fell through, and I remember telling you couple of years ago, I said to you, I'm circling back because I am planning to amplify as many voices as possible, especially the inclusive voices. And I had no idea when I said that this would be the outcome. But yeah, this is us. We're here today, and this is what we're doing. So I am handing you the mic, Natasha. Say hello and maybe share how you want to identify.
Thank you, Terri. Hi, everyone. So as Terri said, my name is Natasha, Natasha Aruliah. And you might notice a little bit of an accent. I was born in the UK. I was born in London, but to Sri Lankan Tamil immigrant parents. My parents actually literally, my mum came pregnant to the UK. So fresh off the boat, as they say, is that expression. Well, not that I like it very much. But I grew up in a small village in the UK, in England, where we were the only people of color. In fact, it was such an quintessential English village that in my recollection, there was one Welsh family, the people that lived across the street from us. There was one Irish family that ran the newsagents. And there was one woman who was Jewish. She was married to an Englishman, and she was my nursery school teacher. But everyone else was English. And so that was the beginning of my personal identity journey. Um, and then as a teenager at 16, we moved to Canada. And as you might imagine, moving as a teenager is a hard time to move, um, especially when I then moved to another community where there were very few people of color and very few immigrants. And it was a very sort of Canadian in terms of settler Canadian, but not the original first inhabitants and the First Nations, but Canadians that I was surrounded by. And so my identity journey was centered there too. So I now still live and work on the unceded and traditional territories of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, otherwise known as Vancouver, Canada. And I identify, therefore, as a racialized immigrant settler. And I use those two words very carefully because I'm not a white settler. And there's a very different journey vis-a-vis colonization that got me here. I'm also part of the global Tamil diaspora and culturally still very English too, in lots of ways. But I also hold other identities of privilege as a cisgender person, a heterosexual, neurotypical, able-bodied, middle-class, and educated person. So I have a lot of complex pieces to my identity.
Oh, yes. And so do all of us, huh?
Right.
All right. So I guess I'll finish off that with your bio so they can really get to know you even more as an inclusive coach. As a psychologist and therapist, Natasha started her career in higher education, working with international and marginalized students before moving to community settings. Working with marginalized individuals and their communities, she witnessed the impact of systems and structures on them and the related trauma. This led to her current work as a trauma aware facilitator, consultant, educator, and coach in JEDI. That is an acronym that's social justice, equity, decolonizing diversity, inclusion, and transformational organizational change. Why Jedi? I'm curious. Taking that acronym.
Yeah, it's one that's not necessarily very commonly used. Sometimes Jedi is used JEDI, and it's justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which most people use. Some people just use EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Versions of that, but it's all the same sort of thing. But I use this with 5 letters, and the first 3 are capitalized and the last 2 are lowercase. And I do that very intentionally because for me, if we are focusing on justice, social justice, equity, and decolonizing, which are the systemic structural pieces, that diversity and inclusion, which is the individual experience, is a necessary byproduct. It comes out of that. It's an outcome of doing the equity and the justice and the decolonizing work. And so we naturally will get diversity and have inclusive workplaces and communities and societies if we focus on justice, equity, and decolonize.
Thank you for that. Yes, just to let you all know, because you can't see the acronym, she has the 3 letters JED in capital and then DI in lowercase for that diversity inclusion, which is a byproduct of JED. And a lot of people wonder about that, but I'm happy you were able to explain it and your focus area and how that all works in our acronym working world. I can't believe, yeah, I work
Yeah.
in it. Yeah. So anyway, with over 25 years of experience, she strives to create spaces for all voices to be brought in and supports dialogue, often difficult and courageous, across differences on topics that are usually avoided, taboo, and challenging. In particular, Sh- Natasha seeks to support organizations and leaders to transform and change in service of their staff and the people they engage with. She has worked with in the government, union, not-for-profit, community, corporate sectors, in the UK, in Europe, in Canada, and the USA, and specifically in the areas of education, healthcare, law, public service, and the environment. I'm going to keep going now. You've done a lot of work. So she has taught also at several institutions, including courses in the certificate in including courses in the certificate in intercultural studies at the University of British Columbia, a range of courses at the Justice Institute of BC, and co-facilitated effective and inclusive group facilitation courses at Simon Fraser University. A particular area of interest is identity development, which has, I'm going to say that again, a particular area of interest is identity development, which she has taught and spoken on all over the world. And she is here today because that is what our topic is on. Did I miss anything? Did I screw anything up in that bio?
No, I'm embarrassed. I think I need to carry you around with me wherever I go to hype me up.
I know. It's so weird, right? It's like, okay, let's do this whole bio thing. And oh, especially if you're like a super humble person. Okay. So, yeah, so this is what we're talking about today. So go ahead, Natasha. What is identity? Let's get us started in your specialty.
Thanks, Terry. Well, I think simply put, if I think about it in terms of sort of a psychological frame of reference, it's just what makes us us, our sense of self, right? And it includes things like um, pieces of us that are unique to us, our personality, our traits, our roles, our affiliations. So, roles in terms of maybe our professions, our education, our training, and relationships, and roles in terms of our family, etc. And this all together contributes to our sense of being and of belonging, the groups we belong to, etc. So as you can tell by that, our identities are really multi-layered and multifaceted. It's not one thing, it's a lot of things. And they weave in both unique aspects of ourselves that are individual characteristics, as well as things that are about the groups we belong to, the affiliations we have. And these things shape our sense of belonging, or sometimes not, and how we
Mhm.
see ourselves and how we interact with the world. If we have this strong sense of self, it shows up in the ways we engage with the world, right? Um, so when we think about our identity, we tend to think of these things that make up who we are, like our interests and values and beliefs. And as I said before, perhaps what we do, our professions, our training, our education, our jobs, and our relationships and roles. But it was really mostly we tend to focus on how we see ourselves. But our identity is not just that, because it can be influenced by the world that we are socialized in, the world around us, and the way that others see us, the way that the world sees us, particularly when we are othered. We are not part of the dominant culture, dominant group, right? We're not part of mainstream society. And so those parts of our identity can be based on how others see us. And we can sometimes and often internalize things about the way others see us, which creates those limiting beliefs and stereotypes about our groups and our affiliations. And we can conform to those dominant norms about what other people expect of us as a result. So our identities can be deeply influenced by other people, not just how we see ourselves. And there's this great YouTube video of John Amici, and he's he's a psychologist now, but he's a former professional basketball player. And he grew up in England, and he's of Nigerian descent, and he's a tall man. He's 6'10" now. But as a child, he was tall and he was big. He was, big, broad shouldered. And he also talks about how he loved to eat. And so he was overweight. He calls himself a chubby child. But he was this big black kid in a very wide environment. And the assumptions that everybody thought of him was because he's big and tall, he must love sport and particularly must be good at basketball. And the reality is, when he was growing up, he was a reader. He would sit in his room and devour books. His favorite place was the library and the pie shop. Um, he didn't see himself that way. And in his childhood, in his family home growing up where he was safe, he was allowed to be the reader and the eater. But as soon as he started school, he was outside, he was sort of left alone. He was the kind of freak, weird kid. And it was only when he wandered onto a basketball court that he found acceptance and belonging. Now it's conditional because he had to be that in order to find that belonging. And it took him a while to actually find a sense of belonging and acceptance for who he is, which is actually a very brilliant academic reader, thinker, you know, um, and bright man, not just a sports person. And so that's kind of the thing about identity. I'm interested in that journey from where we are socialized into being one thing, but we actually work our way through that, through life and through our journey, figuring out, well, who are we? What do we want? What is our authentic self? Um, and not conforming to dominant norms. And, that's one side of it. But the other side of that identity journey, of course, is when we hold identities of privilege and power, when we are part of the dominant group. And that too can be limiting, right? Because there are assumptions about what we should and shouldn't do and who we should or shouldn't associate with, etc. And also, um, there can be challenges to how we see ourselves. We can see ourselves as good people, as fair people, as, we love everybody. We're not biased or or bigoted or anything. But because we are socialized in certain ways, we may perpetuate behaviors and support systems that actually maintain inequity and injustice. And so how do we grapple with recognizing that we're actually part of the problem sometimes, right? So, and how do we be our authentic selves in the sense of if we want to be really good people, how do we be in alignment with that and really act as well as value and believe in fairness and equity and inclusion, right?
Mhm.
So that's what identity is to me, is this, well, it's not just me, it's in the field. It's recognizing that we don't have these neutral identities. They have difference based on access to or not power. And so how we navigate the world based on that and still be true to ourselves.
Yes, that is the vision, or I guess the destination, or the work.
Yeah.
It is like, how do you be true to yourself when you're submerged in systems that expect you to conform to their standards and things like that. And, I will put John's video in the show notes. I just wanted to remember that, as for, because I'm interested in seeing it and what he's talking about. That would be
Mhm.
pretty awesome, especially him being a person. Well, he's an athlete, and then he became a psychologist. And I think about with my identity as someone that is an Emmy-nominated makeup artist that is now a coach, where it's just kind of so almost, it's not that opposite, but it's nice to see someone that it was in like an entertainment industry and has changed over to this part
Mhm.
of life. It just, because I don't see that too often. But thank you so much for that definition on identity and covering that so beautifully. So, I also have facilitated some identity workshops, but after, having conversations with you, I'm just like, I have a lot to learn. And I thought I knew so much. But the reason why I feel like I know so much is because I am constantly, almost every session, pretty much every session, every client I have, I am always doing identity work within my coaching practice, or working with identity, supporting my neurodivergent clients, and honestly, myself, to develop or in some cases, even transform our identities. For example, a client coming in thinking, I'm broken or something is wrong with me, to eventually believing that, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just wired differently, as an example of that transformation in identity. I feel like this work hits so differently for underrepresented groups. We often have like we often have to completely rebuild our sense of self, sometimes decades into our lives, and that's not just a one and done process. It's ongoing and it's complex work to be doing. It's almost like self love work, is what I've actually noticed, because it builds self confidence and that sense of self that is so necessary for people that are pushed to the margins. What do you think about that, Natasha? That self love work? Because you were saying that, that authentic self comes to the surface.
I think it's a crucial piece of it. I mean, my work comes out of a long history of work in the field of psychology around identity development, and there's a whole range of theories of identity development for different groups. And um, really, what it talks about, particularly for folks who have been othered, who have been marginalized, is that when you grow up in a world that doesn't recognize you, validate you, acknowledge you, accept you, it does eat away at your self worth and self esteem. And you grow up feeling less than and not good enough. And all those stories are they're very deeply ingrained in us. And so, you know, and it limits us. Like girls can't do, Black people can't, right? Gay people
Mhm.
can't. And so like for years, LGBT community didn't think they could have children as out LGBTQ folk, right? Because I mean the systems weren't there, the structures weren't there, but it was also somehow that they weren't right to be parents. That's all social stereotypes and bias and plain, you know, heterosexism. I mean, it's just right. It's all
Yeah.
these falsities that we believe and we internalize because society has told us that, right? Um, Women shouldn't do certain types of jobs because they're not made for it, right? And we internalize that. And so it is ongoing work, and it is a journey where we have to kind of be aware of, first become aware of the ways in which we are limited by the ways others see us, the way the world sees us and expects us and limits us into these stereotypes. And just on a quick note on that, there is no positive stereotype. A stereotype is a stereotype and it limits us. I mean, you can say Black people being good at sport is a positive stereotype, but see how it limited John, right? He didn't want to be but he had to become a basketball player to get acceptance, right? To get himself into a different financial bracket, all those things. He couldn't do it by his education, even though he has a brilliant mind. So that's what I mean by limiting. And so and we come to a point in that journey where, as we become aware of the ways in which we're being limited by the expectations of others around us, that we kind of have this cognitive dissonance, right? And that sort of propels us into our work to um, heal from the harm of those limiting beliefs. And that healing is that regaining of self-worth and self-esteem and acceptance of this is who I am. We are not less than. I am not less than. and this is what I have to offer, right? And so that's the kind of the journey. And that journey, I should say, it's an individual journey, but it happens in community. There is the most powerful space for marginalized communities is to be with other people who are like you.
Mm.
Because at that point, you realize that all these messages you've been learning, all the things you've internalized and believe about yourself are not true and that you're not alone. Other people are experiencing the same thing. And that's a really powerful thing to help shift, to help that growth to the next, to the phase of starting to say, so who am I then without all these labels, without all these barriers and stereotypes? Who am I? Right. And then we can start that journey, we can claim ourselves in that way. That's kind of the the journey I think that we go on. And I think about that. I mean, if I've got a bit of time, I'll tell you some examples. I mean, I grew up, as I said, in a small village where I was the only kid of color. And so I would literally tell jokes to my friends. There was a little chocolate bar commercial on television. Cadbury's, it's for fruit and nut bars, and it said fruit fruit and nuts. Cadbury's take them and they cover them with chocolate, right, to incorporate it into. And I literally would sing to my friends, Cadbury's took me and they covered me with chocolate, to kind of say, I'm like you, but I'm just covered in chocolate. Right? Like friends would laugh. Um, but that was kind of my trying to fit in and belong, right? I remember not wanting to dress in traditional clothing, not wanting to eat traditional food, not wanting to speak my language, all those things that othered me, and sort of trying to hide, like, Mum, you don't have to pick. My dad used to come and pick me up from school wearing a sarong. And I'd say, stay in the car. Don't come out of the car. I'll come to you, right? Because I didn't want my friends to see him in his sarong, because those are all ways in which I was othered. And so that's a very typical experience for many, not just immigrant kids. If you think about LGBTQ folk deciding when they, how and when they are themselves and out themselves, right? And until then, they are conforming and trying to, we have the concept of beards, and there's all these things are about how people conform to dominant norms that are not true to themselves. And those behaviors are in every marginalized group. And so if you think about neurodiverse people and the mask, right? You think about able-bodied people. These are people with different abilities. These are all things that we do because we are taught that the way to be is like the dominant group. And that who we are and the way we are is not okay and not good enough.
Mm. Wow. I love that.
So that sense, the client that said, I'm broken. Well, who's naming the brokenness? It's the dominant group, right?
It's exactly what is unbroken. So that's normal. That's right. And I think about how we're talking about the dominant group and society. And then I'm like, on an even smaller level, family.
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it's happening at home. It's happening within families. Yes, there's that broad lens of society and dominant culture and all of that. But it's happening as well at home within our families and with a lot of interactions, especially if you want to be, I don't know, not your own individual. Is that what I'm looking for? Or
Well, that's an interesting, I mean, this is maybe digressing a bit, but it's an interesting thing because individualism is a cultural norm, and it's not universal. It is
Mhm.
not the way the world that people across the world see and understand the world. And um, so for example, if you are a coach and you are Western born and raised and enculturated, and you believe that it's really important to be an individual and make individual choices, or choices that are best for you as an individual, you might be missing out on someone's true authentic self, because part of that is to be in relationship or in their culture, practice their cultural norms, which might be more collectivist. And so they may be quite comfortable and okay with putting aside an individual desire for a group desire. And it's not so. Yeah. So, I mean, I think the thing is that as coaches, or, I mean, I learned this as a counselor, therapy and coaching is very rooted in Western culture. And so if you don't notice that, you don't notice when you're perpetuating norms and values that are based in Western culture, which is dominant,
Mhm.
right? And that
Yeah.
is one form of dominance. And, whiteness and maleness and all these, I mean, women have learned to work in the workplace under predominantly male ways of being.
Mhm.
And so that's why you find women struggling in the workplace, because we are expected to drop everything and do everything and work this sort of well, more than 9 to 5, but this as if we have no other responsibilities. And yet we're usually juggling all the other things in the background. Whereas when men were working traditionally, they had women at home handling all the family and the life, the domestic stuff. And so those kinds of, and the workplace is now starting to shift a bit. I mean, that's part of this work, right? Of equity and diversity and inclusion, is to recognize workplaces need to be more fluid and flexible for humans' responsibilities and lives outside of the workplace. And I say
Mhm.
that because it shouldn't be just women's. It's or men's, or and recognizing that gender is a binary, but it's like, as human beings, we all have lives outside of the workplace and responsibilities, right? And so, um, anyway, I've digressed there a bit, but it is, it is the ways in which we are socialized, we internalize it, and we create our organizations, our workplaces, our systems and structures to replicate it. And when you're not part of that dominant, it makes it very hard. And so that importance of really being in infinity spaces, finding people to help really build our self-worth and self-esteem, so that we can be assured when we put forward different ways of being in the workplace, in the world, and say, here's who I am, and this is how I can contribute, and you will benefit from it.
Thank you for that. Like, this is such a big conversation.
It is.
It's such a big conversation. And I mean, I've seen firsthand, and hey, I mean, I, of course, have internalized bias that, of course, I am going to be unpacking, or will, it's a process. But in our profession, in your professional opinion,
Mhm.
Natasha, what does it mean for coaches, like, to do the work of unpacking their identities in ways that helps us notice the bias we've internalized, even when we see ourselves as fair or progressive leaders? I'm going to actually say that part again because I hit the mic and we're recording for the podcast. So, what does it mean for coaches to do the work of unpacking our identities in ways that helps us notice the bias we've internalized, even when we see ourselves as progressive or fair?
I think the thing about, um, as a professional, is we are often trained in the profession, but particularly as coaches and counselors and leaders, who we are is as important as what we do in our sort of professional training. Um, and what I mean is that um, consciously or unconsciously, we bring ourselves into those roles. And if we're not conscious of what we bring in, we are not necessarily using all of ourselves to do our best work and to be fully present for coaches, for clients, for our reports, our direct reports, etc. And so in identity work in particular, understanding and being aware of, most coaching programs and stuff don't actually spend a lot of time having us look at, well, what does it mean to be a person in this body with these identities and these privileges or these marginalities? And how might that interact in the relationship with the clients, right? With the coachee. If I am a white straight man, how might that impact the relationship with a Black leader that I'm working with, a Black female leader? And what will I need to be aware of? And how will I need to build relationship? The assumption that we can just build relationship by being good people, nice people, is a fallacy. We have to recognize that however we might see, I'm a good person, I'm a nice person, everyone will like me, I'm just going to be nice and they're going to like me and work well with me. No, you have to recognize that you carry, whether you like it or not, you are the embodiment of histories of enslavement, of colonization, if you work in North America, right?
Mm.
You are. And to that person, that might be something that is important in the relationship that you need to address and work through to get to a point where you can be in relationship with each other, in a good working relationship that you can support them, right? You can't assume that you will, just because you're a nice person, that someone who is different is going to trust you, is going to feel safe with you, is going to be able to be fully open and vulnerable with you, right? All of those things so that they can grow. And this is all in support of their growth, right? And their healing, if you're a therapist, and right, and their development if you're a leader. So that is hugely important as a coach or as a leader, is understanding your own identity and being able to leverage it in ways that are meaningful and appropriate and supportive for the people you are engaging and in relationship with.
Yes. It is an obligation to, I want to say, supply trust and safety. Have trust and create. That's it. Create trust and safety within the partnership, within the
Yeah.
relationship. And it is also our obligation to, in order to develop this trust and safety, is to recognize the identities that are sitting in front of you and the difference and how your identity is showing up within that relationship, within that partnership. It's very important. And I had another episode back talking about which one was am I going to? Color blindness, equity, and equality, and how there's a large amount of coaches that would or used to only a couple years ago when I was more involved with the ICF, noticing just the color blindness and thinking, oh, I don't see that identity. And it's like, well, you're leaving that one out. Like, that's huge. That's a very major identity to be ignoring. So um that's not how we want to show up in a coaching relationship.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. It's absolutely, yeah, to deny colorblindness is a really problematic concept because it denies our lived experiences as people of color, as racialized folk who live in a world where that color has great impact on our lives. And so to be the colorblind means to deny us that reality. You're not gender blind. You notice if a person is, is presenting as a woman or a man, right?
Mhm.
So it's, yeah.
And you know what?
Deep,
They ain't colorblind either. I know you see my color. That's why you're talking about not seeing it. But I guess I can go on and on about this again.
yeah.
We're sitting here, you're lying to yourself, not to me. I mean, I know you're lying to yourself, but
And the question behind that, and this is where this is part of the identity work, is why is it important for you to be colorblind? What is the value of being colorblind? Why do it? And it is, if you really interrogate that, it's because you are uncomfortable with acknowledging and noticing race. And that is white privilege. That is white fragility. That is the work of dominant white folk to do in their identity work, because we can't have conversations about inequity and particularly about race without it getting very fraught. And that is because dominant folk, actually in most areas of inequity, dominant folk get uncomfortable because it means they have to look at their privilege. They have to look at the ways in which they have benefited just by being who they are. And that has had an impact on other people not having the same opportunities, privileges, benefits, access, etc. Right? And that makes people feel uncomfortable because they feel, well, I didn't ask for it. I'm a good person. We have all these taglines for why we're not bad people, but us continuing to accept it and to be in those systems and not actually be shifting and changing them means we are part of the problem. And that's a very uncomfortable place in our identities of privilege. But as coaches and as leaders, it's crucial that we do that work because we again have power in those relationships as the coach, as the leader, right? There's already a power difference just by that.
yeah.
So if we're not comfortable with having conversations about the ways in which we hold power and influence so that we can then use it better and use it consciously to challenge those inequities, to make the place more equitable and fair, then we're actually just part of the problem still.
Mm, And what do you think about this guilt? I'm like, can we move past the guilt? Like, can we just go ahead and move past that guilt so we can like get to work? Like, what do you think about that, Natasha?
So it's interesting because if you think about, coming back to this notion of identity development and you think about what is that journey of privilege, the journey of privilege is the first phase of that journey is complete blissful ignorance. You are completely unaware that there's inequity in the world. You just think, the meritocracy myth that people just get to where they are because they worked hard, and that's it. And you are totally unaware of the fact that the systems are rigged and built that way, and you are benefiting from it. And when you start to become aware of it, that dissonance, that cognitive dissonance for you really just trigger the guilt.
Mm,
And in the guilt, we can be immobilized. We can be stuck, right? We can get stuck and we just spin around and around in that guilt. And it means that we're not actually doing anything about it. And so, Esther Amar has a book, Emotional Justice, that really talks a lot about these emotional journeys. And I love her work. But I think that the question she asks is, if you truly believe in equity and inclusion and being a good person, what are you doing about it? And it's to get you past the guilt, because it is about action, right? And so our journeys for our privilege is like, get over ourselves. Yes, we're not bad people because we have this privilege. We're bad people because we do nothing about it, right? Being aware of, this is an accident of birth. No one's blaming you that you were born rich, or you were born white, or you were born male, or you were born whatever. Those are just accidents of birth and the reality. And it's okay to be that. It's not okay to benefit from that without any awareness of the ways in which it harms others. That's the work. And so getting past that and saying, look, I'm not, my partner is a white man. There's a lot of ways that he could say, well, I didn't, but, what are you doing? What are you doing to not perpetuate it, not replicate what white men of the past have done? How do you be a different type of white man? And that's how we get through the guilt. By actually getting into action and changing our behaviors and trying to influence change in the systems and the world we live in.
Yes, and white woman. And
And and
it's
and
not just a white man issue.
and straight women and
And
cis
yes,
and neurotypical
cisgender nerd.
and yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. In all the ways we
exactly.
hold privilege, when we notice that we are benefiting from that, what are we doing to address it?
Hmm.
Don't just feel guilty about it. Do something about it. I mean, yeah, I
Yeah, we
could,
can go on and on. I,
yeah, so I could say something about the current climate, what's happening right now, and I'm not going to go there, but
I know. Yeah. It's so tempting always. So to sum this up, identity is basically the ongoing process, and I mean ongoing, that people engage in to figure out, maintain, and express who they are. Sometimes they're doing it consciously, sometimes it's happening under the radar, but it's always happening. Coaches, here's the thing that gets me so excited about understanding this. Because once we recognize identity is at play in our work, we can start supporting ourselves and our clients through it intentionally. We can normalize these challenges. We can see that feeling unsettled about who we are isn't the problem. That's not actually the problem that needs to be solved or fixed. It's actually the work of being human. Did I capture that right, Natasha? The work part? Oh, you're on mute.
sorry, my phone was ringing.
I got dogs over here and phone vibrating too. It's all good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I always get a little uncomfortable about the word work. Word work. I think that identity, becoming aware of our identity and developing our identity vis-a-vis our relationship to power or our access to power and stuff, is a process that we could all go through. Some people can get stalled right at the early part of that journey and never move past it, right? There are stages of identity development. And so I'm not sure work is the right word. The important thing is to recognize that we all have identities, and that it's a constant for all of us. It's there, whether we're conscious of it or not. And those identities are connected to power and inequity, which are also constants in the world, right? They're just there. And so it's not about I mean, I guess that you could say working on it, but it is about becoming aware of what our identity is in relation to the world in which we live in, which is not neutral, and then using it appropriately, particularly when we have additional power as coaches, as leaders, as therapists and counselors, or, in whatever ways we hold those additional opportunities to leverage. Um, and and so it is about, so that, I guess, is the work. The work is about being vigilant and aware, and then acting to make sure that we are using our identities in ways that are supportive and helping people grow, develop, right? Um, Etc.
Yes. And that is, you're saying, as leaders and as coaches, like in our
Yeah.
professional setting, and
Yeah.
our personal identity work or process is
Yes.
about the transformation that happens when we wrestle with the ways we've
Yes.
internalized the stereotypes others have about us, or the limiting narratives we carry, or the process of rebuilding our sense of self. And that can be, it doesn't have to be a major life event that happened or a traumatic experience, but it is the rebuilding of sense of self. And it's very deep work that is done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that our personal journeys, and I think it's our responsibility as coaches and as leaders to do our
Mhm.
personal
I
work
agree.
first,
I agree.
because we cannot, if we haven't done our work, we cannot support others in their work, and we can actually do harm to others. And I think that's really important, particularly when we hold lots of identities of privilege. We can do real harm as coaches and as leaders when we haven't examined that and really are working from a place with awareness of that, those identities of privilege.
Mhm. Yeah, this sounds at the heart, it's just all about transformation.
Yeah.
Yeah, where we don't just question the external pressures that's outside of us or assumptions, but learn how they've lived within us and what it takes to reshape our sense of self and all of that.
Yeah.
It's very true and authentic, our essential
Yeah.
selves. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I'll give a little example. I mean, well, there's lots of examples, but I remember when I was in high school, I was a good student. And in high school, my counselor advised me to take typing.
Mm,
And steered me in sort of, the softer, easier, more traditional, gendered sort of uh, careers, of admin and secretarial and that kind of
mhm,
stuff.
mhm,
And I was all geared up for pre-med, and she was not very, and this is a woman, right? But she was not very encouraging of me in that way. And as a coach, when you are coaching someone who is maybe the one or the only leader of color in an organization, how are you helping them understand the ways in which, you know, that is showing up in their leadership and getting in the way of them being able to fully step into their authentic leadership in a way that empowers them. Um, you know, or the flip side, if you are working with a white leader who has a team that has a number of racialized staff, or other marginalized staff,
mhm,
and they don't know how to hold them accountable because they're worried about being seen as racist or sexist or
mhm.
homophobic, or right. And so that can get in the way? How do you have those conversations with the coachees, right?
Yeah.
Because those are really important conversations. Leaders do have to lead, but they have to lead with awareness, and we need managing. By not giving me feedback when I'm not doing a good job doesn't help me as a marginalized employee to grow and develop. But if you're frightened to give me that feedback because you're worried I might interpret it as racist or sexist or whatever, then I don't get that feedback. And actually, there's research that shows that that is a very common pattern in workplaces, that leaders don't give appropriate feedback to marginalized staff for fear of being labeled as. And so staff are not getting that feedback, and they're not therefore being mentored and developed and grown. Right. So it's a very concrete example of why we need to actually be able to have these conversations about our differences and how that shows up in all of our relationships and our work in order to support people's growth.
Yeah. And, and I'm totally thinking about, um, when you say that, I'm thinking about the coaching relationship, and I'm thinking
Yeah.
about when I would do it, or when does this happen? And I get this question a lot from coaches, like, when do
Yeah.
we have this conversation? Like, you're sitting there asking them a bunch of questions, like facilitating their growth. And I always like to start within the discovery call, when you're getting to know, when they come in, you want to talk about identity. You want to talk
Yeah.
about their race. You want to talk about difference. You want to talk about yourself. You want to be vulnerable and talk about your identity and how it shows up and all of that. And doing that initially opens the door to that trust and safety and that ability to have that vulnerability and to trust each other in the partnership.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I think having the conversation early, but then ongoing,
Ongoing, yeah.
like if your coachee is talking about a situation in the workplace that they're struggling with, to be able to ask, and do you think there might be any elements of dynamics around gender or race or ability, or, how might those be playing into this situation? Does that have, maybe it doesn't, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But think about it, right? Um, because quite often it is at play. And if it is, then how do we understand that? How do we work with that? How do we, how do they think about it? And so, but not ever thinking about it. I mean, I remember in a, in a course I was teaching on facilitation, this person who has facilitated for 30 plus years in an environment with very diverse groups, and literally said to me, I never think about race when I think about facilitation, and that race is a dynamic going on. And I mean, how can you not when there's a group in front of her that's, full of people of very different racial experiences, including in the Canadian context, Indigenous people, First Nations. So who have it was in an educational setting, and they have a very often traumatized experience with education systems. So that historical context in a lot alone might add some dynamics in the room.
Oh, some beautiful dynamics, let me tell you. I love it. And and I think about too, I take every perspective. Natasha, I'm like perspective. That's my thinking pattern. But I'm thinking about the coaches out there that saying, um, like, my client never brings it up. Or or then I'm thinking about how the client doesn't even have to know that like ageism is an issue for them and
Yeah.
might be an issue because they might not know. They might have internalized these
Yeah.
messages and they think something is wrong with them. So it
Yeah.
is up to us as, and it's our obligation to understand that this is the dynamic that is at play. So it's not about waiting for our clients to identify these challenges. They probably don't even know it exists and it's harming their self esteem and their sense of self.
Yes.
And it is our responsibility as leaders, managers, coaches, whatever it is, to know or ask, be curious about it, because maybe that
Yeah.
might be something they need to think about.
Yeah.
Like, oh, it's not just me. Oh, wait a minute. I forgot about that. Like, oh, that's it.
Yeah. I think, you're absolutely right. They may not know. And so by us being curious, it gives, we're just broadening the possibilities of what might be at play. That's it. You're just widening
Expansion.
all the exactly. But also, it's important for us to do it and not the client, because even if the client does know, it is, they are, it's their emotional labor, it is their essence,
Mhm.
like they're educating us. And what we need to demonstrate is actually we don't need, yes, we don't know everything, but we are aware enough to consider these possibilities. And that builds trust. Because if we can demonstrate that we know that that might be a possibility for them, it may not be their experience, but it might be, that will build trust
Mm.
rather than them having to tell us. So there's power in us bringing it up first.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. So takeaways, like, so here on the podcast, we always leave the listeners with like takeaways and tools and things that they can actually work with. And then they can say, oh gosh, Natasha, it's Terry, you're amazing. So do you have any? I mean, I have a couple. I don't know if you want me to go first, but I'm saying, hey, you seem to be on a roll. Do you want me to try?
Um,
Like,
yeah,
what kind
you
of
go first. There's lots of takeaways. I think the
or
biggest,
tools or strategies, like
yeah.
something, yeah.
If you haven't thought about these things, if you haven't, like, if when you think about your own personal identity, this I'm talking to you as coaches and
Oh,
leaders.
yeah, yeah.
If you as leaders and coaches, if you reflect on yourself and all you come up with is the ways in which, your character or your personality or your values or your beliefs, all things about you uniquely, but there's nothing about your identity in terms of the social identities you carry. If you don't ever think about and you don't identify as white or as straight or as able bodied or as middle class or as educated or all the ways in which privilege holds, because I can guarantee you, if you've got marginality, that's usually part of your self identity. One of my first things is a woman immigrant of color, right? It's just part of
Mhm.
who I
Well,
am.
yeah.
But my partner's is not typically as a white man. It's that he's a cyclist and all the, things he does. So if you as a coach or a leader do not have that in your own self identity, I really encourage you to go and do some work around what are the pieces of your social identity that are missing
Mm,
and why. So do some reading. There's lots of YouTubes and videos about identity and privilege and whiteness and maleness and able-bodiedness and stuff. There's lots of really great articles um, and videos and things to start thinking about. How do I start to incorporate these parts of my identity into me as well? And be comfortable with the fact that, yes, I am also, you know, able-bodied, straight,
yeah.
cisgender, right?
Mm-hmm.
Educated, living in the West. There's so many.
And learning why it matters to
Yeah.
bring these up. Why does it matter to have your pronouns on your Zoom screen?
Yeah.
And as to extend on what you were saying, a lot of like white men or white women would say, I'm just American, Canadian. And it's like, okay, that's not the default, but okay. That you need to
And
work on your identity right there.
yeah. And to be honest, even being that is, you need to think about that in terms of privilege too. What does that mean to be, you know, who calls themselves American or Canadian? And right.
They just go, oh, I'm just American. I'm American too. But they say, where you really from? No, I'm American. Or actually I'm in Canada. Anyway, long story. So, you had, excuse me, my pups are distracting me. You had already mentioned so many amazing reflective questions, though, throughout what we've already talked about, as coaches can use that as a journaling prompt or
Yeah.
tool to process their identity as well. And while also maintaining presence and actively listening, coaches, we can support our clients by identifying stereotypes and messages that they've absorbed to family and culture or society. So if you hear your clients shoulding all over themselves, is the way I like to put it, like I should, that is where you kind of have to jump in. And I know you already know this. And maybe asking yourself some more reflective questions like, where might I be carrying messages that aren't mine? Or which expectations feel like mine? Which expectations feel like mine and which are imposed is another good question to have. What do you think? I see the wheels turning. I see the
Yeah.
thinking happening.
Well, there's because there's sort of two levels. There's the level of self-reflective questions for us as coaches and as leaders. And then there's a level of self-reflective questions we can ask to coaches and direct reports and stuff, right? And so there's both levels going on at the same time. And I think those questions are important for both levels. What are the messages I heard that I might have internalized? Um, what is the expectation or the stereotype or the bias about the groups I belong to, and how might they be true of me too, right? And then you could say that to your coaches, etc. Um, and then beyond that, sort of, and how might these messages be impacting the way I show up in my coaching? Or how might they be in my leadership, right? I think that particularly for leaders and coaches, it's taking that next level. So how might that show up in my coaching or my leadership? What might I be replicating for others? How might I be perpetuating limitations on others?
Mm.
Right.
You got a bunch of
Um,
good ones.
I think that is the journey. That is the work. That when you think about work, the work is always being self-reflective. Journaling is a great practice, and having these questions and thinking about, on a daily basis, how did my identity show up in my work today? Where was I using it consciously, and where might it have shown up in an unconscious
Mhm.
way? Right? Things like that, getting into the practice of asking those questions. What might I do differently? In what ways can I use my identity to support growth? In what ways might it hinder growth? Right. And so there's lots of questions we can ask ourselves. And there's, again, lots of resources out there that you can you can look at. And you can read and use resources around one type of marginality, but often those can transfer around others. So there's lots of work in disability justice. There's lots of work in racial justice. There's lots of work in gender, that right? And you can look at any of those and then start moving those questions across difference. So you can take some of those questions and move it across difference. I think the other question that's really important from a coach and a leadership perspective is whose comfort is being centered.
I like that one. I'm gonna have to write that one down.
Because quite often we won't
Mm.
have the hard conversations because we're centering our own comfort. Especially when we hold identities of privilege and the people we're working with are marginalized.
Mhm.
Can avoid conversations because we want to remain comfortable.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we sometimes can project that on other people. They would be uncomfortable if I asked that question or if I talk about this subject. And that's not often the case. Actually, sometimes confirmation that they are being seen, coming back to that colorblind.
Mhm.
If you don't ask the question, people can think you're colorblind. If you ask the question, they can say, oh, you are acknowledging that my reality might be different or impacted. And that is a really trust building kind of question.
I love it.
Just to,
You got some good ones. Um, I like the one, whose voice is that? I kind of like that one. When I hear it, I'm like, whose voice is that?
yeah,
Is that you?
that's a great one.
So wrapping this up, coaching identity is not about helping clients perform a different version of themselves. It's about standing alongside them as they uncover who they've always been. And when that happens, it's not just a change. Like we've been saying, it's all about transformation. So here's where I want to leave us, or we might want to leave us. When we talk about identity work, we're not talking about coaching the what, the goals, the checklist, the surface changes. We're talking about coaching the who, supporting, because transformation doesn't happen in the doing, it happens in the being. It happens when a client begins to see themselves differently, when we start to hold our own stories with more truth, more compassion, and more possibility. That's the heart of identity. It's about managing change and about becoming. And when we as coaches step into that space with our clients, we don't just help them or support them get somewhere. We walk alongside them as they discover who they are in the process. For me, the takeaway is coaching the who, because the who shifts and the what always follows the who. What are your thoughts in closing? Or even
I
what I
love
said, and then what you're closing, whatever you want,
Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, I think as you were saying that, what came to mind is coaching with an identity lens
Mm.
or an identity framework, however you want to say it. But coaching with acknowledgement that identity is at play means coaching the whole being and creating space for the whole being. It's holistic coaching. It allows people to bring their whole selves into the coaching relationship. And there's an equity ad that used to be, shown. And the caption was, when you go to work, what do you leave behind? And it was this notion that you can't bring your whole self to the workplace. And so the things you left behind were your appearance, your traditional clothes, your hairstyle, your language, your sexual identity, right? All the things you hide from the work environment and your colleagues because you can't bring your whole self. And I think when you bring a coaching lens to an identity lens to coaching, you allow people to be their whole selves. And that's it. And how many spaces in the world do we have where we can be our whole selves unapologetically with total acceptance? This is who I am.
Yeah. And feel safe.
And feel safe, which allows us to then grow and be our best selves.
Mm-hmm.
Because we can then examine the things we want to work on or the things we don't feel are as strong about. And yeah, because none of us are perfect. We all have things to do. But if a coaching relationship creates a space to be our whole selves, we can really, truly be vulnerable and shift and grow and examine all the parts that we want to work with in order to be our best selves.
So, listeners out there, I am going to have the emotional justice book in the show notes. I am also going to have Natasha's LinkedIn information in the show notes where you can contact her, follow her, connect with her, message her, stalk her, book her. Don't stalk her. Don't
Please
stalk
don't.
her. Book her, hire her, whatever you've got to do it, find her, follow her, me too, connect, make it happen. Make it happen. Hmm. Anything else?
No, just thank you. This is a big topic and we could talk for hours.
For
It is,
hours.
it is something that I am so jazzed about. It is a topic that I find so rich and rewarding and so important in the work of justice, equity, decolonizing, diversity and inclusion. Uh, and so, by the way, I changed my name in the video there so that you can see the acronym.
Yes. Oh, cool. Yes, and I forgot to tell you. Well, I didn't forget to tell you. Oh, I cut you off. Go ahead, Natasha.
No,
I apologize.
no, that's okay. Yeah, no, I had a lot of fun. Thank you, Terry.
Of course, of course. And listeners, yes, she changed on the screen because I always forget to mention this. And maybe it could be some avoidance. My intuition is saying, Terry, do you really forget? I have a YouTube page. We have a YouTube page, listeners. It is Inclusive Leadership Coaching. And every guest that I've had on, is on this page, and so will Natasha and I. And most of it is unedited. So you'll see when I go, oh, we got to back it up. And all of that stuff behind the scenes, kind of like, but yeah, it's pretty cool. So please go ahead and head over to the YouTube page so you can watch this video if you are a visual learner. And that might make me actually do something to that page if I get views. I'm like, oh man, now I got to do something. Oh, thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much for your knowledge. I know we could go on, but I think we covered it. And what you said, actually, I forgot to mention about intentionally bringing it. That's why I feel like I'm doing it all the time. Because every coaching session I walk into, I am literally identity focused or identity work focused. I think about where they are on their path. I think about where they want to go. I think about journeying alongside of them and unfolding their identity the whole time. Like that is actually the foundation of how I inclusive leadership coach within my private practice. Mm.
Yeah. And I think that comes because of your own lived experience. And we tend to draw on our own journeys and our own lives to intuitively figure, what we think will be helpful in working with others. Because it's clearly been part of my own journey, and it is very much shows up in all the work that I do with other people. So, yeah.
Yeah. Identity work is the bedrock of inclusive leadership coaching. Yeah.
Yes, I think so, because it is the bedrock of inequity. And so if we want to be inclusive, we have to realize that it is our identities that are excluded, or some of our identities that are excluded. So if we don't understand how identity is linked to inclusive or not, which identities are included and which ones aren't, we can't, identity work is the bedrock.
Because you can't lead inclusively if you don't understand who you are. You can't do anything if we don't really understand. I can't even imagine that world. Or maybe I used to be there, more unconscious, maybe.
Well, yes, and I think we can all be there.
Yeah.
But it's, and some people never leave that. They just live their lives in that unconscious state.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not because they're weak or bad or anything. I mean, my dad was like that. As an immigrant, it was a survival strategy. It was too painful to recognize all the ways in which there was inequity. And so it was just easier to conform and just assimilate. The word is assimilate. It's not even conform, it's to assimilate. And everything in society tells, particularly non-dominant groups, marginalized groups, to assimilate to the dominant norms. Whether you're an immigrant, whether you're queer, whether you're right, able-bodied, just assimilate. And so it was a survival strategy for him, as it is for many other people. So some people never go beyond that. And that's not because they're weak or bad people.
Thank you again. I know we're getting out of here. We could keep talking.
You said,
We can keep talking. All right, listeners. Until next time, keep leading inclusively. Bye.
bye, everyone. Thank you.